Bene, buongiorno.
Good afternoon. They gave me the task to stick to the time schedule. If you know me, it's quite complex and difficult for me to stick to the time schedule. However, we shall try and be Milanese and end in due time. My task today is to introduce and facilitate this session devoted to eye protection, eye care. And we have a group of experts here in their own individual specializations. Dr. Zola will speak about effects especially. And we have distinguished experts that have been working in the field for so many years. In ophthalmology, Roberto Tripodi, Briganti, and Eyecare. I will just introduce the various aspects and specifically the technical side to then get to the effects of radiations and see possible solutions, and especially share with you the aim of the roundtable, to have an exchange of ideas, to understand what companies have available and the various instruments whereby we can really speak about protection. We've been speaking about UV protection for so many years, or blue light protection. But we wonder, do we need additional promotion whereby the final client can get specific messages, clients that are really exposed to the effects of radiation? And I'd like to start with my slides. No, my slide.
Abbiamo degli effetti e quindi era solo quello, qualche minuto, ma ora non so se...
Some technical problems with my slides.
Ah, ok, no, vabbè. Era solo legato. Ok.
Okay, let's get to the next slide.
Perché era l'aspetto semplicemente introduttivo.
So, in introduction, we speak about radiation, and we should try and understand why radiations cause specific problems. When we speak about the electromagnetic spectrum, we speak about something surrounding us, and to assess or to see certain effects, we need specific photoreceptors. Our eye is just sensitive to one side of the whole spectrum. It's the visible spectrum. Near the visible spectrum, you have two other interesting areas, UV and infrared. Speaking about UV, there's some confusion, and let's try and specify some concepts. UV is subdivided into C, B, and A. But in the case of A, specifically, regulations are not in full alignment. We usually believe that regulations give an answer for everybody. Sometimes regulations are not conflicting, but they're based on different parameters. And also in this case, in the case of UVA, you have an area that is not considered by some standards, ISO, ANSI, and just ending with 380, and others 400 nanometers, and it's food for thought. So what should we consider as a boundary? are we in the territory of UV or of the visible light? And the registry of wavelengths should give us the possibility to define boundaries. But based on the different standards, you may have different outcomes. There it is. And just near UV, you have the blue light spectrum. It is a highly debated theme. As you may see, it's an area that gives a visual effect because it gets to the retina, but it has with it some special elements and specific energy content. And then we get to the other side, infrared. Also in our case, the infrared is something for which we don't have the right video camera. What you see is an infrared image, but in order to see it, you need a system that can perceive the effect. And one of the elements that in ophthalmology can be connected to the use of infrared is infrared, but also a video camera that can perceive that type of light. Conversely, you have light, but you don't see any type of effect because our eye doesn't have the necessary instruments to do so. What have I done with my slides? I have some problems. Okay. Speaking about sources of radiation, very briefly, what's the most important source? The sun. The sun comes from every side, and the quantity of energy we get depends on what? Filtering action of the atmosphere. And as you can see from the slide, some wavelengths are quite reduced. And you may say, as we have a small percentage of UV, you shouldn't be concerned. It's not so. Also because, apart from direct light, you have many other secondary sources of exposure. The reflections of the surrounding environment, and now we have a revolution for lighting systems. The bulb, the historical incandescent bulb, released so little in terms of low wavelengths. Then we had fluorescent systems and halogen systems. All things considered, in such cases, blue was quite reduced. Where do things change? By using new LED systems, and depending on color, temperature, or the color that we perceive, there are certain bulbs that give whiter, colder light, and others more warm light, and you see that the quantity of blue present is higher. You have two examples here, and trying to find an eye-catching image. I found this company that advertises a type of light that helps circadian cycles, and in order to do this, they've reduced emission. They've included an emission toward more dangerous wavelengths. So you should distinguish marketing campaign and what can actually cause a specific effect, but also the light of cars has changed, but also digital systems. In all of such cases, you have a peak of emission towards low wavelengths, and this is a sense, because in the case of blue, we don't have big sensitivity, and if we want to have a wide perception and not have a perception shifted toward yellow or warmer colors, you have to offset with an increase in blue. And it's what gives a wide screen, but with an important component of blue. And allow me at this point to show you a slide with some formulas. Why? Because it is useful to understand the concept of energy content. And X-rays, gamma rays, UV, why are they so dangerous? Because they have a high energy content. Energy content is the power of that specific radiation, and in order to create an effect, it should be absorbed. A radiation that is not absorbed cannot create an effect, and that's why it is important, especially for the eye, to know how the various dioptic media absorb, because we will have the effect that the doctor will speak about later. Well, having said this, you see the effect of time. Our eye automatically, it's slow photochromatism, and with exposure to radiation, and this image was published in a book various years ago, and it's still very effective and relevant as an image to understand what happens in the course of years, as years go by. Here, you have transmittance curves, that is to say, the way radiation gets to the retina. And as time goes by, as you can see, progressively, low wavelengths are filtered by the lens, and the eyes of children are extremely exposed because they have the highest transmittance in terms of radiation, and they have a high exposure to different radiation sources, especially now with digital systems. And as a result of all of this, the cumulative effect is important. It's not just a dose today, but it's a small dose every day that creates an effect. And in the case of radiations, it's an important element. And I speak as fast as possible because we are quite late. So, extended sources or point sources during an eclipse, as you perfectly know, an effect is created directly at the level of the retina. It's a point image, and it creates an effect on a specific area. But you also have other extended sources, and they have an effect on other structures. In this case, you can see that an extended source creates an effect at the level of the lens. So this was the initial part, and I can give the floor to my colleague.
Un'introduzione.
Approfonditissima. Thank you very much. This was a very thorough introduction. And now Ms. Zola will talk about the effect. We've been very quick in going through the situation, but now let's focus on the effect. Yes, I will focus on the diseases induced by electromagnetic waves. I'm an eye doctor. I work in Neovision, so the eye clinics of Milan. I've also some introductory slides, but I will be very quick on that. We have some problems with the pointer. But Mr. Montani also explained the electromagnetic spectrum, which is a very wide spectrum. So again, we've seen the spectrum of electromagnetic waves, which is very large, the frequency, the wavelength change. And so the lower the wavelengths, the higher the frequencies. We have X, ultraviolet rays, radio waves, and infrared radio waves, etc., as you can see here. In this second slide, you see the practical repercussions of this information. As you can see, these radiations, these electromagnetic waves, are widely used in our daily life. Gamma rays, X-rays, ultraviolet rays, and I will focus on that later. Infrared rays, radio waves, for example, in the microwave ovens, and radio waves, for example, that we use on a daily basis, both at home and outside. As Mr. Montani said, well, the energy depends directly on frequency. So the higher the frequency, the higher the energy transported by the electromagnetic waves. This is the visible light. As we saw, it is a very small portion of the spectrum, between 400 and 750 nanometers. It's the sunlight, it's the white light that we see every day, well, which is actually not white, but it is. It can be split into all these colors. The blue shades are closer to the higher frequencies and therefore are more dangerous than the others. That's the solar spectrum, the sunlight. In the middle, you see the visible light, but before the visible light, there are ultraviolet rays that are not visible. However, they interact with the eyes a lot, followed by infrared rays with higher wavelengths and lower frequencies, so they are less dangerous. But what are the structures in the eye that absorb ultraviolet rays? We have the cornea that absorbs, well, due to the position of the eye, the ultraviolet rays are very dangerous because it is projected outwards, but also the role of the eye, because the eye works with light, and that's the reason why the interaction with ultraviolet rays is extremely important for the eye function. The cornea is the most external part, and it is extremely exposed and absorbed all the rays under the 300 nanometers. Underneath, we have the lens, so the absorbance is slightly lower than that of the cornea, but it also absorbs UVA and UVB rays. Last but not least, we have the retina that gets very few of these rays because the lens, if present, and if it is not too clear, too transparent, as it is the case in babies and in small children, is able to absorb most of the UV lights, and so the retina is exposed to a lesser degree of UV rays. Here you see the screen provided by the ozone layer, which is a greenhouse gas above the atmosphere that has the ability to block, if it is integral, most of the UVC rays, which are the most dangerous ones, as they have the highest frequency. We have already hinted at that. Let me repeat it. There are many environmental factors that have an impact on the amount of UV rays. The daytime, well, most of the ultraviolet rays are concentrated between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., but also the surrounding environment. Snow, for example, is extremely important for the reflection of UV rays, because snow reflects more than 80% of the UV rays. White sand, also, the height is also another important factor for UV rays. The higher you are, the scarcer the atmospheric filter is, and the energy increases. If we are in the shade, we are able to protect ourselves from at least 50% of the UV rays. But let's focus on damages. Damages can be twofold. You may have deterministic damages. if they are directly linked to the degree of exposure in a small period of time. Erythemas, for example, sunburns, or in my cases, actinic keratoconjunctivitis, and they are usually reversible damages. Unlike deterministic damages, stochastic damages are due to a continuous, repeated exposure to low energy UV rays that increase the possibility to get a specific disease. On the one hand, you see an erythema, and on the other hand, you see wrinkles, which are two completely different effects. But let's now go into the details of my personal field of specialization, so eyes and surrounding diseases. Sun-caused eye diseases may hit the lids, the conjunctiva, the cornea, the lens, or the retina. As far as the lid is concerned, it is very difficult to assess the sensitivity of that part of the skin. It is certainly the most sensitive part of the body skin. It is very thin, it has less epithelial tissue, and suffers the most from any external factors. And these are the typical conditions, the typical diseases. Blepharitis is very frequent. It is an inflammation of the glands that are located on the lid rim. Actinic keratosis is instead a skin lesion, a precancerous skin lesion that can degenerate in cancer and squamous cell cancer. It is very difficult to differentiate it, especially in the early stage, from the Bowen's disease. The Bowen's disease also appears as a squamous lesion, and biopsies are usually necessary to differentiate between both diseases. And then squamous cell carcinoma, which is the most frequent lid skin cancers, and which is usually the exacerbation of the two aforementioned diseases. Underneath the lid, the first tissue that we find is the conjunctiva. The most frequent disease with a deterministic damage is actinic keratoconjunctivitis, which is also called snow reflect blindness. Well, the exposure can be also limited in time, but it has a high degree of energy brought by UV rays, and this leads to burn in the keratoconjunctivated plane with photophobia, pain, sufferance of the corneal epithelium, and so on and so forth. It is a reversible disease with a proper treatment. Well, greater latency is typical for pterygium. Pterygium is a proliferation of the conjunctiva that leads to a white tissue next to the nose that spreads through the cornea over time. And when it invades the cornea, this leads to a loss in vision, not only due to the presence of this white lesion, but also through a deformation of the cornea. It is very frequent in tropical country where the exposure to high energy rays is more frequent, especially without protection. No medical treatment and surgery is needed. Again, the surgical treatment often leads to relapses. Pterygium is well known for causing relapses, for recurring over time. And then we have pinguecula, which is very similar because it is also a proliferation of the conjunctiva. It is softer, it never invades the cornea, and it appears in the form of a thick yellowish tissue because it contains fat cells. It is not dangerous. It does not lead to drop in the visual acuity, and treatment may be conservative. That is, it is not necessary to remove it unless there are cosmetic issues that require the removal, the surgical removal of this disease. And then we have a photokeratitis or actinic keratitis, which is very closely connected to keratoconjunctivitis. Well, it affects the cornea, as you can see in the picture with fluorescent dyed, and all the dots that you can see are microabrasions. This is also a very frequent disease among skiers if the proper protection is not worn, but also welders. If welders do not use the protective mask, they may develop photokeratitis. It is extremely painful because the cornea is the most sensitive part of the whole body, but luckily enough it is reversible through topic treatments with antibiotic ointments and sometimes also with a bandage. Cataract. Well, the damage caused by UV rays on the lens is has a sort of cumulative effect with a very long latency. It is caused by the exposure to UV rays throughout the years. It is a progressive opacification of the eye. There is a correlation with UV rays, so the greater the exposure, the greater the aging of that part of the eye, which is also physiological. So the patient suffers from a progressive decrease in vision, a progressive opacification of the vision, and the only possible treatment is a surgical one. The lens is removed surgically and it is replaced through an artificial lens. Artificial lenses today contain specific filters for UV rays in order to mimic the protective function that the natural lens has. Last but not least, the retina. We have already talked about eclipse maculopathy. Well, this is a very direct effect which is linked to the exposure to this type of light, which is very rich in energy for also a very small period of time, that leads to photoreceptor burn in that part of the eye that is used to see also the smallest letters and so on and so forth. So specific treatments are, for example, corticosteroids, anti-inflammatory drugs, but prognosis is usually poor because there is a scar in the middle of the macula. So the patient will have a central scotoma that is in the middle of the vision field. The patient will not be able to see. Another disease is the macular degeneration, which is another retinal disease, which is very widespread and also severe. There is a correlation in this case with the exposure, as it was the case for cataract. It is a stochastic damage, so exposure slow but continues to UV rays. This disease leads to a progressive degeneration of the photoreceptor and alterations in the macular region, which is a very important part of the retina. In reality, and especially for the dry form of maculopathy, there are no treatments that are warranted and that can be really effective. Lot can be done in terms of prevention and in terms of early diagnosis. Upon diagnosis, patients are recommended that they change their lifestyle and they adopt the right measures in order to avoid progression. There are also dietary supplements that are recommended and that supplement the retina with protective pigments, so pigments that protect that specific region of the retina. In conclusion, we've seen that the sun is paramount for our vision, and vision is paramount for our life. Energy sources can also become dangerous if not properly controlled. For this reason, excessive lighting does not help us. On the contrary, it can seriously damage the eye structures. Prevention, as we will see later on more in detail, is really fundamental. As you can see in this picture, well, prevention is extremely important and protection is really important since the very childhood. Especially in childhood, natural protective systems work the least. So in order to avoid damages in adulthood, it is very important to be protected in childhood again. Prevention, as I was saying, implies the use of high-quality sunglasses with high-quality lenses to be bought from an optician, and also regular eye exams. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bene, grazie dottoressa per aver chiarito un po' le...
Thank you a lot for speaking about the effects and the entity of the effects of radiations. As we have 20 minutes left, we get to the theme of the round table, an exchange with the operators of the sector who represent a link between companies and professionals. And on the basis of their experience, it is important to shed light on some elements. What is under everybody's eyes is clear, the effects of certain wavelengths. And from my experience, the message that the final consumer gets, well, can be brought back to the concept of protection, that is to say, sunglasses. But is it enough to speak about top quality sunglasses with specific filters? Is it enough to have effective protection, or actually for ametrope patients that require ophthalmic protection, should they get something different also when lenses are not dark, or when eyeglasses are used with transparent lenses? That's the point. I'd like to start with Roberto Tripodi, who has the task to start. So my question is as follows. From your experience, a protection-related message, and it's now so fashionable to speak about sunscreens and protection factor. Are there certain elements that can be used by professionals to suggest specific solutions? So, I will start. First of all, I'd like to thank again for this great opportunity to share some thoughts and to generate culture and make the sector aware about the importance of such themes. Now, to give an answer to your question, consumers should be more aware through correct information about risk exposure, but also identification of problems in daily life. And I heard it in your speeches, but not only. UV light, for example. it's a hidden danger. It's not visible. It's energy, actually. And we have spoken about sunglasses, sun lenses. But the problem is the awareness about materials of the lens that should continuously protect the eye against danger. And then correction and protection, it's an integrated concept. This is true for UV light, but also blue light. And then perhaps some specific questions will be asked. Then another theme. Optical materials. And you should also consider regulation standards. Optical materials reduce UV radiation 310 nanometers. You have a big peak of energy of UV light, and optical materials already act in that case, irrespective of the index. And then photochromatic lenses that can systematically offer an integrated solution that can adapt to all light conditions and protect you against UV light, but also blue light. One last point. Somebody spoke about it before. Reflected light. Reflected light is something that should be some way or other observed. Also, in those moments you think you may be protected against UV light, actually the same type of UV light bounces in the internal surface of the lens. And if you don't have anti-reflective properties applied to clear lenses, well, then you have a problem. So, technology and solutions and awareness. Thank you so much. Because you have stressed a set of problems. Well, we have a problem, but we have a set of solutions to tackle this type of condition. And at this point, I'd like to give the floor back to Fabio Briganti. To understand how end consumers may be adequately informed about risks, but especially solutions available. I also believe that information given by the optician to consumers plays a fundamental role. And we should try and explain the risks for the eye, but for the periocular area in terms of protection against UV radiation. And for sure, it's a time-consuming process. But I believe that consumers are mentally predisposed to the concept of UV protection for the tissues of the body, a bit less for the eyes. And the area surrounding the eyes. But it's not so easy for consumers to visually understand to what extent ophthalmic lenses can protect in terms of radiation. And I believe it's important to create some demonstration tools that can give easy explanations and not speak about transmittance and technical terms that could not be understood by final consumers. We should show them how different materials present today on the markets can anyhow guarantee different levels of protection.
Diciamo ancora una volta, considerando
and considering the importance of protection and how this theme is taken for granted, in my opinion, I've always heard about protection, and we always hear about UV sun radiation, and it seems there's nothing more to say about it. But in your opinion, is there an innovative way to bring back the attention to specific problems? It seems that we've been speaking about protection forever, and it might become one of those themes where we take so many things for granted, but we do not stress what technology can offer us and new solutions available for professionals. What can be done? What can be done to raise the awareness? What can be done to have new attention to the theme? Thank you so much for your question. It's a sense of life style question. Because, yes, we've been speaking about protection for so long, and we've always had protective products at various levels. We don't have some sort of collective awareness. I cannot tell you why we don't have this type of awareness, just like it happens for sunscreens. And we know that our kids must be protected against the sun by applying sunscreens, but we don't pay attention to their eyes. So consumers, physicians, optical centers should cooperate, and we should create an awareness so that what is available can be given to everybody. How can we do it? It's a difficult question. We should start from information dissemination, but much has been done by companies, and for years at conferences they've been speaking about this theme. And so at the moment, what I'd like to say is that companies have done so much in the past few years. And they have contributed to the theme of protection by providing different types of materials and so on and so forth. And perhaps there's no information given to consumers when they buy specifically some sort of information on protection for consumers. In the case of professionals, we include eye doctors giving information about risks, but also opticians, optometrists that offer solutions. And we should all stress that today it is so important to have prevention, also in the case of kids, and an ophthalmic solution cannot be considered as an instrument to let people see well, but to protect the integrity of the eye system all over a lifespan, because the eyes should last longer, because life expectancy is longer. In all the various instruments, should be used to protect the eye, and we should act whereby such messages can be conveyed to final consumers in an easy way. Would you like to add something? Yes? Something I'd like to stress. Cooperation of the optician with the eye doctor is fundamental, and it's not taken for granted, and I strongly believe in it. Such two professional figures should work together. These are nice words, and they should be heard at all levels. And it's just through collaboration of the various categories that some way or other we can all grow, but especially we can provide the best service to clients, to patients. Because their asset, that is to say, vision, is fundamental. And so we need to cooperate, a multidisciplinary approach. In our different capacities, ophthalmologists, or also when we speak about corrective systems, well, we all play a fundamental role, and just by using a common language can we achieve certain objectives. And with a small effort we can eliminate barriers and work adequately. This theme is not one of the themes that should have been debated in this roundtable, but what I've just said is really necessary, because the responsibility we have is major responsibility. So we can see how we can implement what has just been said. I don't know if there are some questions. Yes, I expected a question from you.
Un attimo, ti diamo voce.
Tralasciando l'aspetto viso-posturale.
Is it better to spend time using a small screen, 25 centimeters, or a bigger screen, 50, 60 centimeters, in terms of possible radiation damage? Well, it's an extremely difficult question. I don't know if somebody wants to reply. With regard to size, distance, for sure, is an element that reduces energy contribution, and articles were published, and one specific article was published, and they analyzed intensity, and then quantity that can create potential hazard, and also position. Smartphone has a small screen used at a close distance. A computer has a bigger screen, bigger distance. What's the lesser evil? If we want to consider things in a broad perspective, the lesser evil is what allows you to keep a bigger distance, especially in terms of interaction between accommodation and convergence. At a protective level, I believe that distance helps reduce contributions. Why? Because we speak about sources that can concentrate or not their own effect. So as a good rule, it's obvious that when the device is far, well, it's much better. Every day articles are published, but on the basis of scientific evidence, increasing distance and increasing the size of the screen is much better in terms of potential risks, even if I must admit that with regard to potential risks, low wavelengths, specifically blue, those that lead life outdoors run higher risks because the blue component intensity is higher than what is released from smartphones. And just time can give us answers that cannot be given by scientific evidence. Possible effects in the long term. We should see what the results are in today's youths and what the impact of digital systems will be.
No. Un cambio ritengo proprio di.
So in the future we shall see how lifestyle can affect the outcomes. However, increasing the distance improves things. Yes.
Sì, per loro, per me il tempo è
Proprio
finito, il mio.
2 secondi.
Okay.
In realtà proprio la settimana scorsa
Last week I talked about protection in a school, and I'd like to go back to the question asked. Yes, when we speak about sunscreens, well, everybody is aware of it, and what about eye protection? And I spoke with kids. In the case of sunscreens, for example, in newspapers and on television, they always speak about the importance of using sunscreens, especially when the summer is about to come. And if I get sunburn after solar exposure, it's something that can be easily seen. When you have instead UV damage, you don't see it physically, because if I have an exposure today, I will have problems in 30 years' time. And what do you think about what I've just said? And because this answer was given by youngsters, by students. Well, the real theme is awareness, knowledge, analysis about possible risks. So yes, UV in the skin. You have an industry, you have an information system and some protection factor for sunscreens. However, conceptually, this type of direction is one of the directions that might be taken by us as well. To speak about effects of lenses, and once again, saying that lenses can protect you always against radiation, and it's an act of awareness, and it's also some form of prevention, because at the basis of it all, you have a theme: improving the quality of life. Improving the quality of life should be at the center of our debates for everybody. That's the real thing. Thank you so much, Roberto. I'd like to give the floor back to Fabio Briganti. for a closing. I agree with Silvano. So it's some sort of cultural path. We need time. We need time to inform end consumers and young people about damage of UV light. More than 50% of UV light absorbed in 60 years, well, they are absorbed in the first 20 years of life. Because people spend time outdoors. So this is a fundamental theme. So you have the big responsibility to close the session. Is it because you're hungry or no, because they send us away? The only thing that we can do in the short term is avoiding self-prescription. Yes, you don't just have lack of protection for lack of information about UV light, but you have lack of information about so many things in our sector. So people should go to a professional. Yes, I agree. Yes, the figure of a professional is fundamental. And just to close, we spoke about white light protection, and don't forget about the importance of sunglasses. And conceiving eyeglasses, not just sunglasses, not just as something fashionable, but also as a way to protect yourselves. Thanks a lot.